Thank you so much for joining me on Teach Me How to Money. Today we have an incredible guest, someone who I've been dying to meet for such a long time. It's Lindsay Stanbury. She's the work and money editor of Refinery 29, and she's the author of Money Diaries, everything you've always wanted to know about your finances and everyone else's. Hey, Lindsay.
Hey, thanks so much for having me on.
I'm so excited to see you.
I always like to talk to another Lindsay.
It's Lindsay to Lindsay.
Yes, it's really exciting.
So you guys also have a podcast coming out. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, so we're launching it later this spring, and it's called Money Diaries, the podcast. And we're diving a little deeper into the diaries that we run on the site, and women are calling in with their pressing financial questions.
So tell us a little bit about Money Diaries and what it's all about on Refinery and why people read it and why it's so popular.
Yeah, so Money Diaries is our daily financial column. We launched it in January 2016, so we're coming up on our 3-year anniversary, which is crazy. Thank you. We've published over 1,000 diaries at this point, which is crazy. And basically, it tracks millennial women's spending for a week, and they give information about their salaries, their take-home pay, how much they're putting into their 401k, what they pay in rent, all those kind of interesting details that we don't necessarily share daily. And then they go deeper. You know, they talk about their relationships, their careers, the bad Netflix shows they're binging, everything about their lives.
Because we spend a lot more on things that we don't think we spend money on. And I think the diaries really help women look into their budgets and see where their money is actually going versus just their rent and dinners out. There's also the little things like your Netflix subscription.
Yeah.
And, stops for candy on the way home from work.
It's true. And that $5 latte.
Absolutely.
I'm really bad about swiping my credit card at the grocery store and not actually looking at the total. So this is a good way to really get a sense of what you're spending.
So the one thing I really like about Money Diaries, because I've been following them too, is it's incited a lot of conversations about who makes what, who makes more money, men or women, or how much should we be making for our salary at our age. And it just goes to show how money is still so taboo to just talk about how much we make.
Yeah, I think it's still really uncomfortable. I even don't really like to have those conversations with my friends. It can be kind of awkward, and I think that there's a lot of this feeling for women especially, if we make I don't want to even say too much because that sounds crazy. But if we make a healthy salary, there's a guilt that maybe our friends will judge us for making a lot.
Sure.
Or if we don't make enough, there's this concern that we're not keeping up. And so there's a lot of feelings and emotions around it.
Absolutely. And how much should you be saving and who's picking up the check?
Yeah.
And I know that when I used to go out with my friends, there'd always be awkwardness around the check because who drank more, who ordered more. And I know that that's part of I don't make as much, but I don't want people to know that I don't make as much.
Right. Navigating splitting a group bill at dinner is truly the worst thing ever.
It's my nightmare.
Yeah, I agree.
So, but why do you think, just taking a deeper dive, why do you think that people in general are just so ashamed when it comes to just talking about how much they make?
I think that because we've created this fake taboo. I actually think that women really do want to talk about this, and that's why Money Diaries is so successful and why women are so willing to share this so publicly, and also why the comment section is so vibrant and stressful at times.
I'm sure.
It's because we are all holding in this anxiety about it, and then we want to talk about it, and we've all been socialized to believe we're not supposed to. I think that my parents are very supportive of my career, but I think it kind of freaks them out a little bit that I sit around and talk about other people's money all day.
I just think it's really hard for people to just begin to put it out there how much they're making, because then they might realize how they're getting paid less than other people. And do you think it's harder for women to talk about money versus men?
I don't. I think it's hard for everyone.
I think it's hard for everybody, too.
I think that that's kind of a myth that we've created. I do think that women are just now beginning to tell their financial narratives. It has been dominated by men in the past. We are beginning to earn more than them, to have better jobs. We go to college at a greater degree. We also have more debt than them. So it's finally our chance to share our stories, and that's exciting, and drive the narrative.
Well, sometimes you're not even supposed to talk about how much you make, especially in the workplace. You can get in a lot of trouble.
Yes, but they can't fire you.
Right, but some people think they can be fired.
They do. I mean, it makes sense that a company doesn't want you to share your salary. When you begin to share that information, you have power, and that's really intimidating for companies. I say that, it's really tricky navigating whether or not you tell your coworkers your salary.
Yeah.
You got to weigh the pros and cons of that really carefully. And I say never ever go to your boss and say hey, I know that they make less than me and that's not fair, because that just makes everything terrible.
Or just that this person makes more than me, that's not fair either.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was funny. We interviewed our head of HR here, and she gave us a really good lesson on how not to ask for a raise.
Yeah, exactly.
And that was the one thing she said, never go and say, this person makes, a little more than me, give me. You should always have first of all, they do frown on those conversations because you never know what they came in on, and everyone's situation is very different.
It is very different.
But it can still feel really bad.
It can feel really bad. And I think it can be good motivation to find a new job. I know that's not necessarily popular advice, but sometimes, you're at a place and it's never going to get better. And this is an opportunity to know it. And I think that's where knowing salaries are really important, is when you go out and you're looking for that next job, to make sure that you are being paid fairly the next time.
So what should you do? So say you find out that, you're an assistant editor and there's another assistant editor, and you realize that you're making, almost significantly less than they are. How do you deal with that inner rage, and then how do you make it productive?
Well, I think you complain a lot about it with your friends, right? Lots of venting to the right people.
And then you spend money on wine and you have to split the check.
Exactly. And then you split the check. And then I think it's about really making an argument for why you should get a higher salary. So sitting down and writing down all your accomplishments, really thinking about the steps that you are taking. I also think that in situations where you're being paid less than a guy, there could be some pay inequity there that can be a systemic problem in your company. And there have been examples. I know Salesforce a few years ago did that huge survey of their entire company and ended up giving women raises. So if that's the situation, there can be steps that you can take with HR to be you actually need to fix this problem.
And sometimes some people are better at asking for what they're worth at the beginning, when they start the job, and it's hard to make up for that. If you didn't know what you were worth when you started, what you asked for, you might always be at a disadvantage.
Yeah, that's why you should always ask for more. It's really hard, though. We do this series at Refinery called Salary Stories, where women track their salary over their careers, the ups and downs. And I was editing one this morning, and it really reminded me that it's so hard in the beginning of your career to advocate for yourself.
Absolutely. Well, you have no experience.
You have no experience. And it gets easier and easier as it goes along, and you have more to, it's easier to show what you've done. So I just think that's something to keep in mind, too. Most of us in our 20s don't know what we're doing.
No. Some of us in our 30s don't know what we're doing.
I mean, that's the truth, right?
But what if it's sort of a deeper problem? What if it's not just about experience and gender, but what if you're a person of color, or you're starting to feel is it more than just the work I'm doing? Is it me? Is it the way I'm being reflected in the company? What are some things that they can do, some steps they can put in place to make sure that they feel comfortable going forward to HR and saying, hey, I really deserve to be making more, and I'm concerned that it's more than just my performance?
I think it's so hard. I think a big part is finding a great advocate. I think for women, and this is really an unfair thing, but for women of color also, there tends to be negative reactions to asking for raises. So finding that person who's going to help you can be a really big thing. And that includes finding a great male ally. It's not always easy, but they are out there. There are some of them, and get them to help you advocate for yourself. And I also think that, like I said, maybe it's time to find a new job, and that new job can offer huge pay bumps.
So how do you find out what you're worth? I mean, not your self-worth. We're all worth something. But
yes.
If you want to figure out what your worth is in the marketplace versus your experience, what's a good place to start?
So that's when you actually should start talking to people about their salaries. And that can also be talking in ranges. It's okay if you don't want to tell me exactly what you make, but I'm looking for a new job, and what would you suggest a great range is? One suggestion, I worked with Fran Hauser, she wrote this fantastic book, Myth of the Nice Girl. And she gave this piece of advice to me that I have really hung on to, which is to talk to recruiters, because they don't have any there's no emotion tied up to it. You're not comparing yourself to a peer, but they're giving you hard numbers of what they're seeing in the industry. So even if you're not looking for a job right now, it can be worth calling them up and be like, hey, can we have a cup of coffee? Can you tell me what you're seeing?
I think that's really great advice. So how do you get up the courage to ask for more?
Yeah, that's hard. I think timing is everything. I think that you really have to think about what's going on in your industry, what's going on at your immediate company, and then down to did your boss have a good morning or a bad morning? They had a bad morning. This is probably not the day to bring up the raise. And then really like prepare, like have that sheet with all of your notes about all the awesome things. Bring the receipts, as they say, to like really prove that you're worth, and practice. I think that's a really good thing to do so that you've got your ideas down and you feel really comfortable about it.
What about when you get the job offer and you're close to sealing the deal, and then you think, like, I'm going to go for that extra $5,000. I know a lot of women feel like, oh, I should just be happy with what we don't believe that, but we feel like, oh, I don't want to be greedy. I don't want to ask for too much. How can we suspend, I'm sure men feel this way too, but how can you suspend that feeling that is so unproductive?
Well, I used to say they'd never take away a job offer, and then yet last week I had a conversation with a woman who said her friend just negotiated herself out of a job offer, which is terrifying. I didn't think that could happen.
What does that mean?
I don't know. I didn't get all the details. I was like, wait, you have to tell me more. But essentially, she was asking for more and more, and they couldn't come to something, and the company rescinded the offer. I think probably in the end with a situation like that, she didn't want the job in the first place.
Sure. That makes sense.
And I think that's something to really remember, especially as you like progress in your career. Like if a job opportunity doesn't work out, there's a really good chance that it just wasn't right and you've dodged a bullet.
Do you think it's fair for somebody to go in and say that you don't get what you want in the outset? Can you say, is there a raise structure?
Yes.
Like what are some milestones I'll need to hit to get to,
Or like 4 months down the line, can we revisit this? I think that putting those kinds of lines in the sand, really talking about how do bonuses work? What does the pay, is there equity? Like, is there 401k matching? Can you give me more vacation time? I think that those are all really important things to be talking about. And oftentimes we're just so excited to get a job, we don't even think about that.
We can just be sort of grateful.
Yes. Stop being grateful.
Yeah, stop being grateful. You're there for a reason. They wanted you for a reason.
Grateful doesn't pay the rent.
I think that's excellent advice. So we were talking about this earlier, but this has happened to all of us. We all go out. Someone always wants to go out to a fancier restaurant for someone's birthday. Someone always wants to order the fancy, the bottles of wine versus the glasses of wine.
Yeah.
And you don't want to be the person who's like, pulling out singles for the check. How can you put out there that it's just not in your budget, but you still want to be a cool friend and celebrate? How can you navigate that without feeling like a jerk?
Yeah. I think that just being honest is a really big part of it. Everybody feels that stress from time to time, and the people who don't, they can go and have dinner without you. I am not the biggest. I don't like group dinners. I think that they're so awful. And
you don't get to talk to anybody.
You don't get to talk to anybody. They're really expensive. They're not fun. And those one of those things that you can actually say no to them and it's okay. And you can be like, I'm going to meet you for a drink afterward and I will buy you your fancy cocktail, but I'm not paying, $100 to have this dinner that I'm not even going to enjoy. Why are they always at small plates restaurants too?
I was just going to say, why are they the small plates big expense?
Oh, it's awful.
I know, for one fig, you're paying $18.
For one fig, and you're so hungry afterwards. It's the worst. Just say no. It's really okay to say no.
It is okay to say no.
And if you don't want to say that, it's because your budget's tight, lie and say you're too busy. I have a conflict. I have a conflict. Not a big deal.
One of my friends said to me, she's like, I really want to take you out for your birthday. I love you, but it's just, I can't make it work, but I will meet you afterwards for drinks. And it was totally fine. And then after she kept apologizing, she was so embarrassed, but who cares?
Who cares?
And if they do care, maybe they're should not be on your birthday list next year.
Yes, I think that that's true too.
Yeah, absolutely. So, but how do you deal when you have a friend who's just makes more than you and it's a good friend, someone you grew up with? How can you have that equality with vacations? They want more.
Yeah. I mean, it goes down to that's a question that even applies to when you have a partner, and you have different ideas about the hotel you're staying at. I think it's just, again, about having being honest about it and being a little vulnerable and understanding that everybody's coming from different places and having different priorities. And with friends and vacations, you're making a choice to vacation with them. So being upfront about expectations on budget before you even book a flight, I think is crucial.
And not for nothing, your friend who has a lot of money might just be throwing this all on her credit card too.
She might.
You might also be doing her a favor by being listen, I don't know if I could shell out $2,000 for this 2-week vacation to Costa Rica. I don't want to put on my credit card. And she might say, now that you mention it, I do have 10 grand on my credit card. And it's like, maybe we can get an Airbnb in the Catskills or something.
Something more affordable. For both of you.
Absolutely. I think it is helpful for people to talk about these things. And I know that we all get embarrassed. And the other thing I wanted to say is, how can we deal with making more than our partners? Because I know, like, we're used to the idea of a man makes more than the woman. And even though that's so dated and hokey, people still have those issues today. And how can a woman feel awesome about making a great salary if her husband's making slightly less or her partner's making slightly less?
I just think that a big part of that is again, the open and honest communication, but then also the feeling that, like, it's my turn right now, it might be your turn later. We're a partnership. There's going to be ups and downs for both of us. And, I don't think at the end of the day a person's salary is, reflects their self-worth. You shouldn't reflect their self-worth. That's not how I go out and seek a partner. I don't want the person who's going to, like, save me. I want somebody who's going to be supportive of me. And I think, we're spun this fantasy when we were kids that, we're going to grow up and marry someone who's going to take care of all our needs. But that, when your husband or partner makes a lot more than you, that also builds in some awkwardness and inequity. And so it's tough either way you do it. I don't think that people really – they put so much emphasis on, like, oh, my gosh, female breadwinners are going to destroy the world, when it's, in fact, like, money and relationships is just tough regardless. Like, you make equal, you make more, you make less. Everybody kind of struggles with it.
That's true. And whether you stay home to, like, raise a family, like, you're still putting in a lot of sweat equity into your household.
You are. And, I think that remembering that money and relationships really powers what you can do together and building a future. And that's what works for me is that everything is kind of one big pot and we figure it out as we go. And, some people, it's better if it's a little bit more separated. But I think for women especially, it's really important to have that income. You never know what kind of horrible thing could happen.
Absolutely.
Like the worst of the worst.
So you need that 3 months, whether you call it an emergency fund or an F-off fund.
Yes.
We all need, and men need it too. You need to get out of there in a hurry and you don't want to have to throw it on your credit card. That's just smart thinking, no matter who you are.
It is.
So we were talking about the Money Diaries, which you've been working so hard on. Tell us some of the most shocking things you've discovered from learning about what women spend their money on.
It's funny. I always get asked this question. People are not shocking. That's kind of the beauty of Money Diaries, is that, like, they're wonderfully mundane, and that, like, people talk about buying, I don't know, a pack of gum or, like, negotiating, going out to a bar on a date and figuring out who's picking up the tab. And I just think that they are so relatable in the fact that they are kind of boring. I'm trying to think. I edited one last weekend that made me laugh out loud. I'm trying to think what she was doing. Oh, she was in Montana, and she was amazing. And they were eating roadkill antelope.
As you do.
And I was like, what? That's crazy, but awesome.
Right. You're out when in Montana?
One in Montana, exactly.
So what do you think people, when you look at the comments, what are people learning from the Money Diaries? How is looking at other people's budgets turning out to be really helpful for them?
I think that there's a lot of relatability there. I think that there's also, it's easy to fall into judging. There's sometimes a relief of, like, she's making that much and she's putting none in my 401k. Like, look at me, I'm doing better. I've got it figured out a little bit. I think, for us on the coasts, where looking at the rent and in South Dakota, I was talking to a diarist yesterday, and she lives in South Dakota and has a 3-bedroom house, and they pay $1,100 a month. And, like, a little part of me died. But then she also lives in South Dakota, so
which is different
opportunities there. Her husband likes to ice climb, so. I was like, I don't even know what that is, but great.
Well, it just goes to show you can have more outdoorsy lives. You can trade certain things in. If you're tired of paying $2,000 in rent, you can move someplace else and have that house and have that peace and quiet. And you can give you a lens into a whole other way of being.
A whole other way of life. It's
I love that.
Fascinating.
And you can find happiness, wherever you want.
Yeah. Women are doing lots of really cool stuff all around the country.
Well, tell us the one thing that you learned about your own budgeting and your own financial life from editing the Money Diaries.
Yeah, I definitely have curbed my bad coffee spending habits.
Okay.
Working on Money Diaries.
Is coffee so bad?
I don't think coffee is so bad. I just figured, after knowing how much I've spent on it, there are better ways that I could be spending that money. And I think that it's just, in general, made me, appreciate and think about my spending a little bit more. Like sometimes I'll play a game where I'll think, like, what will the diary, like if I had a diary, what would people respond in the comments with this purchase?
Those comments have gotten to you. You've commented in your brain now.
They are totally in my brain. They're judging me everywhere I go.
So if we wanted to learn more about you, to learn more about the Money Diaries, what you're up to, listen to the podcast, how can we find you?
So it's all on refinery29.com. Money Diaries publishes 7 days a week, except major holidays. So we took Christmas and New Year's off this year. And the podcast will be wherever podcasts are available, and the book is everywhere books are sold.
And how can someone submit a money diary to you?
You can submit through the site, and we're always looking for new submissions. And I think we might be taking some men this year. So if you're feeling, like taking a risk, I think having a men's diary on the site would be interesting.
I think so too. I think dudes want to know what other dudes are spending money on.
Yeah.
I think that we all deserve some equality. I think they deserve some too.
They deserve to run the comic gauntlet.
Oh my goodness, we were traumatized in comments. Well, thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure to have you, and I'm so excited we finally met.
Yeah, me too.